What happens when the aortic valve fails to close properly? In these patients with aortic regurgitation, how can we use transesophageal echocardiography in diagnosis and management for better clinical care? We'll cover all that and more in this episode of Tea Time. Welcome back to Tea Time, also called TEE Time. I'm your host, Dr. Andreas Plakis, and you'll notice our colors are back red again because we are kicking off the next part of our valve series, All Things Aortic Valve. And in this episode, we're going to be starting part 1, How to Evaluate Aortic Regurgitation with TEE. The clinical questions that we're going to be addressing in this episode are: what are the clinical considerations for aortic regurgitation and aortic valve surgery, and how can a clinician properly evaluate aortic regurgitation using TEE? I mentioned that in this episode, it kicks off our aortic valve series where we cover aortic regurgitation, aortic stenosis, aortic valve replacements and repairs. This episode will start the evaluation of aortic regurgitation in this 2-part series. Part 1, which we're going to be covering today, will consist of the definitions, causes, and pathophysiology of aortic regurgitation, goals of your TEE assessment, indications for valve intervention, and also aortic valve TEE views and the TEE exam sequence when interrogating an aortic valve. Aortic regurgitation, also called AR, or aortic insufficiency, called AI, which can be used interchangeably, is where you have an incompetent aortic valve that leads to insufficient forward cardiac output. This in turn leads to volume and pressure overload in the left ventricle and can lead to LV dysfunction over time. If it's severe and or acute, this can lead to impaired organ perfusion. Let's review some of the causes and pathophysiology of aortic regurgitation that you need to know before you start your exam. When thinking of the main causes of aortic insufficiency, it can be broken into 2 main categories. The first of which is primary AR, which is a problem with the aortic valve leaflets or cusps themselves. The second is a secondary problem with the aorta that leads to problems with coaptation of the aortic valve. When looking at primary aortic regurgitation, where you have problems with the aortic valve leaflets themselves, there are several types that may occur. Some of the more common ones include myxomatous etiology, where you have excess or floppy leaflet tissue, degenerative etiology, where you could have calcified or restricted leaflets, bicuspid aortic valve with an abnormal number of cusps, rheumatic disease, and also endocarditis, where you have harm to the leaflets themselves. What are some of the secondary causes of aortic regurgitation? Well, these can be thought of as aortic pathology, the first of which is an acute aortic dissection. There are a few different ways that this can cause aortic insufficiency, the first of which is if you have dilation of the aorta at the sinotubular junction, which leads to leaflet tethering and malcoaptation. Another mechanism is if you have a dissection flap that actually prolapses through the aortic valve and leads to regurgitation that way. Lastly, if you have a dissection at the sinotubular junction, this can lead to disruption of the leaflet attachment sites. Another mechanism that can lead to aortic insufficiency is an ascending aortic aneurysm. There are a number of causes for this, but the most common causes typically include connective tissue disorders such as Marfan or Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, or bicuspid aortic valve. And there's a number of other less common causes that can lead to secondary aortic regurgitation as well. There's also a distinction to be made between acute and chronic aortic regurgitation, which are identified and managed very differently. For the purposes of this podcast episode, we're going to focus nearly all of our attention on chronic aortic regurgitation. Acute aortic regurgitation occurs when a patient develops aortic regurgitation with quick onset before the left ventricle has time to adapt to the higher volume and pressure overload. Causes of this include acute aortic dissection, endocarditis, and trauma. As I mentioned, the left ventricle cannot dilate acutely. This leads to a rapid increase in left ventricular end diastolic pressure. This higher pressure is transmitted to increased mean left atrial and pulmonary venous pressures and can lead to subsequent pulmonary edema. While the pulmonary edema can be devastating to a patient, these pressure gradients can prematurely close the mitral valve as the LVEDP exceeds the pressure in the left atrium, and this can lead to decreased cardiac output as well. This top clip of acute aortic regurgitation is one of a patient with an acute aortic dissection, and the bottom 2 clips are of a patient with endocarditis causing cardiogenic shock. In chronic aortic regurgitation, the left ventricular end diastolic pressure and volume are slowly increased. So the left ventricle undergoes eccentric hypertrophy where it dilates to accommodate this increased volume and pressure overload. There's also no early closure of the mitral valve. This LV enlargement with normal EF leads to an increased total stroke volume to maintain forward cardiac output. Well, this is a side note from TEE, but one of the cardiac anesthesia takeaways from this episode, the overall goal of management is to improve forward blood flow and limit backward blood flow. You do this by aiming for a faster heart rate. You avoid bradycardia by aiming for a heart rate of 80 to 100 beats per minute. This shortens the diastolic period, which is the time of regurgitant flow. Also, in your cardiac output equation, heart rate times stroke volume is what leads to higher cardiac output, and higher heart rate equals higher cardiac output. You want to aim for a patient who is full and not hypovolemic, and then make sure you are avoiding hypertension. The regurgitant flow from aortic regurgitation is influenced by this aortic to LV pressure gradient. The lower your systemic blood pressure, essentially your aortic pressure, the lower the gradient pushing blood back towards the left ventricle. Do you need to know these pressure volume loops to understand aortic regurgitation? Well, you sure do for your licensing exams to be able to pass your tests a little bit more effectively. But I don't want to put you to sleep, so we are going to pass on this for the sake of this episode. What are some of the general goals of transesophageal echocardiography when evaluating aortic regurgitation? These may seem similar from when we went through evaluating mitral regurgitation, but anytime you have a valvular lesion, you want to be able to understand the mechanism, location, and severity of the defect. The mechanism can be divided into the Elkhoury class of aortic regurgitation, types 1, 2, and 3. The location we'll get into, that's pretty self-explanatory, and the severity based on the 2017 ASC guidelines to understand mild, moderate, or severe aortic regurgitation. Furthermore, when it comes to surgical context, we want to understand some of the factors that go into repair versus replacement decision-making so we can help guide surgeons based on our echo findings. Lastly, we'll also want to look at other factors such as the ascending aorta, other valves, and other perioperative considerations in regards to cannulation, cardioplegia, or other perioperative factors. The Elkhoury classes for aortic regurgitation help us understand the mechanism of aortic insufficiency a lot better. There's a lot of similarities between these and mitral valve Carpentier classes, where type 1 would be normal leaflet motion, type 2 is excessive leaflet motion, and type 3 is restricted motion. These can help guide repair versus replacement decision-making, which will be covered in more detail in later episodes. And they also help give greater understanding to how both the aorta and aortic valves contribute to the mechanism of aortic valve incompetence. Khoury Type I is where you have normal cusp motion. 1A is when you have an ascending aortic aneurysm with STJ dilation, no sinus of Valsalva involvement. And remember, dilation only causes aortic insufficiency if the STJ is involved, not if it's isolated ascending aorta dilation. 1B is when you have dilation of the STJ and the sinus of Valsalva, which can be associated with Marfan and Ehlers-Danlos. Remember, Marfan's is associated with this pear-shaped aorta that just looks similar in structure. You can also have isolated aortic annulus dilation. And then finally, 1D is where you have normal cusp motion, but you have a cusp perforation causing aortic insufficiency. The Khoury Type II is when you have excessive cusp motion. This occurs when you have a prolapse or a flail cusp, as you see in this echo clip here. Some of the contributors are if you have excessive leaflet tissue or disruption at the commissural level. The final Khoury class is Type 3, where you have restricted cusp motion. This is especially important for surgeons because this is the greatest risk of repair failure if a surgeon tries to repair the aortic valve. You'll see in these top two clips, you have a rheumatic aortic valve that leads to restricted cusp motion. And in the bottom two clips, you see significant calcifications or a degenerative aortic valve that's leading to aortic insufficiency as well. What are some of the indications for aortic valve replacement surgery, and what should we be thinking about? When thinking about aortic valve replacement surgery, and exactly some of the factors that you want to be evaluating with echocardiography, these can be broken into 5 major categories. The first is the patient symptomatic. Are they short of breath, having exertional dyspnea? Number 2, is there LV dysfunction or decreasing ejection fraction? Number 3, is there progressive LV dilation and remodeling? Number 4, what is the dilation status of the ascending aorta? And number 5 is the patient having other cardiac surgery and they have moderate or severe aortic regurgitation that we need to consider intervening on as well. Let's look at some of the 2020 AHA-ACC aortic valve replacement indications. If a patient has severe symptomatic aortic regurgitation, that is a class 1 indication for replacement. Patients with severe AR with symptoms have a high risk of death if AVR is not performed. If a patient has severe asymptomatic aortic regurgitation, if the LVEF has dropped below 55 or a patient is undergoing any other cardiac surgery, this is a class 1 recommendation for aortic valve replacement surgery. Outcomes are better if the AVR is performed before symptoms occur, if the EF has dropped below 55%. If the LVEF is above 55% and the LV end systolic diameter is above 50 millimeters, or if it's proportional to body surface area, this is a class 2A recommendation for AVR. A patient who has normal LVEF and increased LV end systolic diameter is showing significant LV remodeling, and this is associated with development of symptoms and development of LV systolic dysfunction. Finally, if there is decrease of LVEF to less than 55 to 60% or increase in LV end diastolic diameter greater than 65 millimeters on 3 TTE studies and the patient is low surgical risk, this is a class 2B recommendation for AVR. A few other categories: if a patient has moderate aortic regurgitation and is undergoing other cardiac surgery, this is a class 2A recommendation for AVR. And let's not forget about the ascending aorta here. If you have an AVR planned and you find an ascending aortic aneurysm greater than 4.5 centimeters, that ought to be intervened upon and replaced at an experienced center, or if it's greater than 5 centimeters at any center. And this is a class 2A recommendation as well. Let's highlight a few of the differences from the European guidelines from 2025. For patients with symptomatic severe aortic regurgitation but not surgical candidates, there's a class 2B recommendation for TAVI. In asymptomatic severe aortic regurgitation, the LVEF less than 50% is a class 1 recommendation, whereas it was 55% or less in those AHA-ACC guidelines. Lastly, in asymptomatic severe AR, there is an LV end systolic diameter index and an end systolic volume index, which are essentially the LV end systolic diameter and volume indexed to body surface area. And there's recommendations regarding these values. Let's look at some of the specific TEE sequence and views to use when evaluating aortic regurgitation. There are 5 major views I use with TEE to evaluate an aortic valve. This is going to be a big picture start, and we're going to get in more detail as we go through the rest of this episode and into the next episode as well. But each of these views I use with and without color, and also some of the views I use more advanced measurements as well. The first view is the mid-esophageal aortic valve short axis. The next view is the mid-esophageal aortic valve long axis. The third view is the mid-esophageal ascending aorta long axis. The fourth view is the deep transgastric 5-chamber view at 0 degrees, or the transgastric long axis view. I don't find additional benefit to use both, but just make sure you can get one good one of either one of these. And lastly, I use the mid-esophageal descending aorta long axis view. The first view I mentioned is a mid-esophageal aortic valve short axis view, which you can find at an omniplane angle roughly between 30 and 45 degrees. From a 2-dimensional echocardiography standpoint, I look at the cusp structure and function in this view. Using color Doppler, I can determine the jet location, whether it's central or between commissures. This is also a great spot to do 3D echocardiography to calculate your vena contracta area. If you want to perform further advanced measurements from this view, you can advance the probe to evaluate the left ventricular outflow tract, or withdraw the probe to be able to see the coronaries and aortic root a little bit better. Because this view is typically in the near field, I recommend resolution mode, as you'll be able to get the best details of those cusps using that mode. It's important to note which cusps are which. Remember, the non-coronary cusp is closest to the inner atrial septum, the right coronary cusp is closest to the RV, and then the left coronary cusp is the remaining one where the left main coronary artery comes off. The next view, view 2, is the mid-esophageal aortic valve long axis view, which is best found at an omniplane angle between 120 and 140. Using 2D echo, you can also evaluate cusp structure and function here, and the LVOT anatomy. Using color Doppler, you can further evaluate AR, looking at the vena contracta, a significant flow convergence, the jet width to LVOT ratio, and then assess as a central versus an eccentric jet. The measurements you may take here of the LVOT or the aortic valve annulus should be measured in mid-systole when that aortic valve is open from inner edge to inner edge. And in the LVOT, that measurement should be within 5 to 10 millimeters of the aortic valve. Some of the tips here to get your best possible image are to use the zoom function to focus on just what you want to measure or evaluate, and also X-plane through the exact part of the mid-esophageal aortic valve short axis that you want to see. When you're looking at these echo clips, the right coronary cusp will always be on the bottom, but it could be the non-coronary cusp or the left coronary cusp that you see on the top. The third view that is helpful for evaluating aortic regurgitation is the mid-esophageal ascending aorta long axis view with an omniplane angle between 90 and 110 degrees. You could start with this 0-degree mid-esophageal ascending aorta short axis view and X-plane through it to give you a nice centered mid-esophageal ascending aorta long axis view. When you make measurements from this view, measurements should be in diastole from leading edge to leading edge, and you can get measurements of the sinuses of Valsalva, the sinotubular junction, and the ascending aorta from this view. The fourth view when evaluating aortic regurgitation is the deep transgastric 5-chamber view, which is seen at 0 degrees, or the transgastric long axis view, typically seen around 120 degrees. From these views, I'd like to perform more advanced measurements. I'll perform pressure half-time measurements, get baseline gradients of the LVOT and aortic valve, and then finally look at the jet signal density to determine the degree of aortic regurgitation. You can also perform some of the quantitative measurements in these views, which I typically would not recommend as I think they're error prone and other tools are more helpful, but you could perform EROA using PISA and the stroke volume method to help quantify your aortic regurgitation. The final view to evaluate aortic regurgitation is the mid-esophageal descending aorta long axis view found at a 90-degree omniplane angle. If you start by evaluating the mid-esophageal views of the heart and turn your TEE probe toward the patient's left side, you will obtain this mid-esophageal descending aorta short axis view. Now, if you X-plane through that, or just change your omniplane angle to 90, it will give you this long axis view of the descending aorta. If you place pulse wave Doppler on the right side of this image, it will allow you to evaluate forward and reversed flow more clearly. This is important when you want to evaluate holodiastolic flow reversal with pulse wave Doppler. So this is part 1 of a 2-part series. There's a whole lot more content left in part 2 to complete the assessment of aortic regurgitation. We're going to get into a lot more detail, but some of the key points here. The clinical importance of aortic regurgitation matters a lot because of the adverse effects on the left ventricle structure and function over time. A systematic evaluation using transesophageal echocardiography leads to more accurate and more comprehensive valvular assessment. And finally, you always want to remember your ultimate big picture goals of your TEE exams you perform as a clinician who can serve to determine the mechanism, location, and severity of the aortic regurgitation by the end of your exam. Doing this properly will help drive surgical decision making, such as the repair versus replacement decision making, and will also inform the surgeon if any other work needs to be done or there's any other surgical considerations, such as the ascending aorta lesions, other valvular lesions, or anything else you may find that could impact patient outcomes and be important to remember perioperatively. I've already mentioned this a few times, but next episode, part 2, how to evaluate aortic regurgitation using TEE. Stay tuned for this one. This will really round out all the details that we have presented in this episode and give you the most comprehensive approach for how to evaluate AR using TEE. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If this content is helpful for you, feel free to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave us a comment as well. We love hearing from you guys, what you're learning, something that you have to offer so that we can all learn from each other. But thank you again for watching. We'll see you all next time.